Hello guys, we are back in new fanfic, and if enjoying this then please share and like part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. It's kind of weird, started Sora after another few minutes of silence. She was leaning against Matt, not particularly looking at any of her friends as nostalgia clouded her features. I always thought we were the first, you know. All our adventures, and saving the world, it's weird to know we were the second. Mimi nodded, agreeing with her. For the longest time, they thought they were the first kids to ever set foot in the digital world and make a real difference. They weren't bitter about being second, no, they were more mature than that, but they could admit that knowing their seniority didn't really exist was odd. They'd functioned as if they were mentors that any following generations of Digidestined could look up to. They couldn't help but wonder if they would lose this role once their predecessors were found. It's weird, yeah, but we can't let that get to us. They may have come before us, but we're still all part of the same family. We're all Digidestined. It doesn't matter who came first, especially not now. We've got a serious threat on our hands. Let's find these guys and protect the digital world again, said Tai, a warm determination lacing his words. Mimi smiled and the others nodded. Seniority didn't matter. X equals. Go Taku! Cheered Zoe from the stands as Takuya slipped past the opposing team's defense, before kicking the ball with such speed that the goalie had no time to react before the ball slammed into the net and spun to a stop. A few days had passed since they'd dreamed about the voice calling to them, and right now they were all attending one of Takuya's soccer games, showing their support, not that he needed the extra boost in confidence. His team had been dominating the match from the beginning, a score of 4-1 as of his latest goal. The whistle sounded, and Takuya gave a somewhat relieved smile down on the field. He almost felt kind of bad about beating the opposing team so easily. Not to mention, for a quarterfinal match it was rather lacking. The team they'd just beaten was supposed to be better than this, but their 3 key players had apparently been injured in some accident. Needless to say, it was like cutting the head off a chicken. The opposing team couldn't function. Having just finished shaking hands with some members of the opposing team, Takuya walked off to meet his friends. They congratulated him and then walked off in the direction of the park they frequented. As they chatted, they didn't notice the pair of eyes watching them from the distance. X equals. Marsman looked into the flower pit from one of the cliffs encircling it. It hadn't taken him nearly as long as he thought it would to track down Ceresman's companion, and that bothered him. It had been easy. Too easy in his opinion. Being the digital god of war that he was, he could only view this as a trap. Still, he was certain he was stronger, and smarter for that matter, than whatever could possibly be waiting for him in the pit below. With that in mind, he leapt from the cliff and descended into the flowers. You came, as I expected, stated Genai from behind the Olympian Mega. Marsman turned and narrowed his eyes. The old man hadn't been there when he descended, he was sure of that. Where had he come from? Yes, that I have. You were foolish to have remained here if you were aware that I was coming. No trap you lay could possibly hold me. My quest shall be fulfilled, smirked Marsman. You will come with me and together we shall wait for Ceresman to come and save you. As her companion, I doubt the caring fool will allow this transgression against her. Genai merely chuckled and took a seat in the flowers. Thou dare to laugh at me? What is so amusing? Growled Marsman. He was not one to enjoy such boring quests from his superiors. He was a warrior, fighting was in his blood. War was his life. This talking did not suit him. He'd never once thought the phrase, shoot first, ask questions later, was flawed. And if he'd deleted everyone before questions were asked, that was fine too. With that said, to have this old man laugh at him and not be allowed to delete him on the spot was frustrating. Oh, nothing. Though I have to say, it's a shame I won't be going with you, replied Genai, a calm smile gracing his countenance. And why is that? Well, I just wanted to see what you were coming after me for, before I left, that is. I didn't think it would have been so easy to get the information I desired. It's nice to know that my life isn't currently in danger. It's given me some options. Thou hast no options. Ye are here, within my grasp. Where does thou think thee could go? Yes, there is no way I could escape you, started Genai. I'm trapped, stuck here. Indeed, it seems that I have no choice but to be taken hostage. Of course, that is all on the assumption that I really am here, which I'm not. I'm just a simple hologram, meant to buy time and discover your agenda for me. Goodbye, Marsman. With those words, Genai vanished from the field, leaving behind a raging Marsman. The war mega clenched his fists and growled menacingly before leaping into the air. He was free of the cliffs in seconds and landed a few feet away. Snarling, he trudged onward, intending to find Genai again as the sun beat down on his back. X equals. Takuya sighed as he leaned against a tree in the park. The shade protected him from the heat of the sun above. Today was fairly hot and he was rather tired. Playing a soccer game under the heat of today's sun had been more exhausting than he'd expected. It made him wonder if his life was getting too normal. Back when he could become a Gunimon, the heat would never bother him. He used to love it. Fire was his element after all. He'd been without his Digimon side for far too long. Tired? Asked Zoe as she sat down next to him, smoothing out her skirt as she did. Takuya merely grumbled yes, seeming dissatisfied with his own answer. She supposed she could understand. He shouldn't be tired. Sorry for ruining our little relaxing moment, but it's starting to bother me now. We haven't gotten in contact with that voice in a while. It's already Saturday, grumbled Koji with a scowl. You're not sorry. Don't lie, piped up JP with a sigh. He'd been hoping to relax for at least 5 minutes before something serious came up, so much for that. Koji was a dream crusher. Shooting JP a glare, Koji continued. We should do something. Like? Asked Takuya. We could look for her. Interjected Tommy as he laid down. The grass felt good. Almost as good as his mattress, he mused. He missed this sensation. Sleeping on the grass under the stars of the digital world was something he'd never forget. Unfortunately, lying in the grass in the human world is as close as he'd gotten in a long while. We would, Tommy, if we knew where to start, or what they looked like. Though, I'm sure it would be a little hard to miss a Digimon, joked Takuya lightly. Are you so sure about that? The 6 of them froze in place at the sudden intrusion into their conversation, a conversation about Digimon. They felt dread creep into them. They'd been caught talking about Digimon. In their surprise, though, they failed to realize that explaining their conversation away as a game was an option, and more importantly, they hadn't realized that whoever was listening in on them already knew about Digimon. You needn't make such fearful faces, children. Weren't you looking for me? Koichi's brows furrowed as they turned to look at their eavesdropper, confused and on guard. They narrowed their eyes at her. Standing before the 6 warriors was a curvaceous beauty. Her hair, as pink as sakura blossoms, was long and flowing. It looked silky and very smooth. Her eyes were dark green, like that of a leaf. She wore a floral patterned purple blouse and a skirt of the same color, but a lighter shade. There was a pleasant smile on her face and a small mole beneath her right eye. What do you mean we were looking for you? Asked Koichi. Who are you? The woman smiled and glanced around, making sure no one else was in this area of the park. The next thing she did was slowly morph from a human into her earthen, armor-adorned, Digimon form. The warriors were shocked, not because a seemingly human woman had turned into a Digimon, because they'd done that more times than they could count, but because she'd done it with no Digivice and the telltale signs of spirit evolution, the fractal code, had not been present at all. You're a Digimon, breathed Zoe. Ceresman nodded. Yes, I'm Ceresman Medium, she replied, and I'm the one who called for your help. The 6 warriors were reminded of their dream and immediately jumped into questions. Ceresman held up her hands as her eyes gleamed. She was being overwhelmed by these children's questions. Calm down please. They didn't hear her. Could you please relax, she said, adding a bit more force into her voice. The questions kept coming. I'll tell you as much as I can, so please slow down. No change. Children, she ground out, a definite edge now present in her voice. She was starting to really get annoyed. Be quiet, she growled. Yet again, there was no change. In fact, the warriors got louder as they tried to talk over each other. At this point, Ceresman was trembling. Shut up, you little brats. Her exclamation silenced them and apparently the wildlife as well. Not even a single bird was chirping. Clearing her throat and giving an embarrassed smile at her outburst, she spoke up once more. Sorry for yelling, but I couldn't get a word in. As I said, I am Ceresman medium. Just Ceresman is fine, of course. The warriors nodded, and this time, Takuya was the only one to ask a question. Why did you call for us? The digital world is in grave danger, started Ceresman. A vast amount of time has passed there since your adventures, and while it has changed very much and a new generation has stepped up to defend it in your place, for this threat I fear they may not be enough. But what are we supposed to do? Asked Zoe. Yeah, added Koji, I don't know if you know or not, but we can't spirit evolve. We don't have our spirits. Ceresman merely smiled at that statement. I'm the solution to that. I'll give you the full story later, but I had the luxury of seeing you defeat Luciman before you all had to return here. From then on I watched the happenings of the digital world. Its changes, the threats it has faced. I knew where your spirits were laid to rest, said Ceresman as she began to glow. 10 distinct orbs of light materialized around her, circulating around Ceresman's form. Accept your spirits, warriors. Wasting no time, the 6 warriors of legend raised their detectors. X. Carrie smiled as she slid into the booth of the cafe she and her friends frequented. Today was a girls' day out. Sashi, Yole, Mimi, and Sora had gone out shopping. What better way to spend a Saturday, right? They'd been out and about since around 8 today, and now it was about 2 in the afternoon. Their conversations had been bouncing from movies, to clothes, to music, to the digital world. Unfortunately, as Carrie finished her order, she saw that gleam in Yole's eye. That gleam that could only mean one thing: boys. So, Mimi, started Yole. Mimi sent an ever-dazzling smile her way, well aware of what was about to happen. She encouraged it, in fact. She had no qualms with letting her friends in on what her plans for her love life were. Besides, she knew they'd eventually get around to Carrie, and that's what she was interested in hearing. Yes, I haven't heard about any new boyfriends lately. What's up? Oh, you know, she said, I'm just done dating around. I'm in the mood for someone who has the capacity to think long term, she finished. Sora and Carrie held expressions of surprise. They hadn't expected to hear that. Mimi wasn't the type to date more than one guy at a time, or date a large number of them in a short period of time. She didn't date guys that seemed bad either, but they knew that she hadn't been looking for anything long term, at least, not until recently. I'm assuming you already have a guy in mind? Sora inquired, now curious. Oh yes, Mimi replied, yes. I do. Carrie's eyes would have widened further if they could have. For just that instant, Mimi's childishly bubbly attitude had vanished and been replaced with something flirty, more mature, and oddly predatory in Carrie's opinion. She'd never seen her friend like that, and honestly she never wanted to again. Who is it? Asked Yole excitedly as the waitress returned. Mimi waited until they'd been served their drinks and their cake before she replied, and boy what a reply it was. Tai. The table had been rendered silent. Say what? Asked Carrie in a very un-Carrie-like fashion. Taichi Kamiya. Your brother. Carrie was rendered speechless again. Why Tai? Asked Sora, curiously. She'd already gotten over her slight shock, as she'd already suspected Mimi may have liked him due to all the flirting recently, and now she was all for it. She'd been hoping Tai would find himself someone special. As far as she was concerned, she'd feel a lot better if it was Mimi instead of some girl from outside the group. I'm not sure really, giggled Mimi before taking a bite of her cake. After swallowing she continued, It's just, at some point I started seeing him as a guy rather than just our leader, and since then I just couldn't help myself. I like him, a lot, she blushed. Yole swooned, Sora smirked, and Carrie just smiled. As odd as it had sounded earlier, Carrie was okay with this. Mimi would treat her brother right, and as soon as Tai realized he had someone like Mimi pining after him, he'd treat her right too. Enough about me though, said Mimi, what about you girls? Yole and Sora talked a bit about how things were going with Ken and Matt respectively. Carrie, for her part, had simply listened the whole time and made little comments here and there. She figured they'd change the topic soon enough, as she didn't have anything to contribute. They already knew how much TK and Davis liked her, and they knew that some time ago Carrie had said something to them that made them calm down in their pursuit of her after they'd nearly gotten into a serious fight over her. As it stood, they still tried to get her attention, but something had definitely changed. They didn't know the details though. Carrie had refused to talk about it. All they could do now was speculate. So what about you, Carrie? Asked Yole. The crest bearer of light blinked. What? You heard her, silly, giggled Mimi, what about you? Averting her eyes, Carrie took a sip of her tea. The scenery outside had suddenly become interesting. I don't know what you mean. You guys already know about how Davis and TK feel about me. You see it just about every day. What's there to tell? Well, aside from the fact that you've yet to tell us how you feel about them, a new cap wearing, brown-haired, goggle-headed Digidestined comes to mind, smirked Sora as she saw Carrie's cheeks flush ever so slightly. He's really cute, Carrie admitted. The other three girls smiled, and Yole said something along the lines of, amen to that. But I barely know him, she continued. We haven't talked since that night I gave him his Digivice back, and besides, him and Zoe seem really close. I think they might be dating, so it doesn't even matter, she added, thinking that would put an end to this. She was mistaken. Actually, said Mimi, I've been chatting with Zoe pretty frequently these past few days. They aren't dating. According to her, they're more family than anything. She told me he would have called you or texted by now to say he was glad Davis, Ken, and TK were okay, but that he was practicing extra hard this week for some important soccer game today. Mimi frowned. Why are you frowning? No reason really, Sora, I just should have asked where the game was. We could have had Carrie to go cheer for him or something, said Mimi, trailing off, and learn some more about them and their Digimon as well as their other Digidestined friends, of course, she added as an afterthought. Please don't try to play matchmaker, you guys, pleaded Carrie. I don't see why it's such a big deal. Having a boyfriend is wonderful. Carrie almost snorted. Almost. Of course, Yole would say that. She was boy crazy, and to a larger extent, Ken crazy. I still don't know him, Yole. If it happens then it happens, but there are some more important things going on right now. I don't think now is a good time for me to go boyfriend hunting. Yole hummed her agreement, though on the inside she was thinking that there was never a bad time to go boyfriend hunting, not that she had to worry anymore. She was already in a very happy relationship with Ken. Still, she wasn't really going to give up on her friend that easily. On the outside she'd surrendered, but on the inside there was scheming, trying to find a way to set the two up. Carrie would probably figure her plan that she still needed to come up with out at some point, but Yole was sure she'd thank her in the end. With that thought, Yole smiled. Carrie had no idea what was in store for her, no idea at all. X equals. As Genai sat against the wall in yet another one of his safe havens, and as Marsman scoured the digital world for him, a miracle was happening elsewhere. According to legend, when a member of the Olympus 12 died, they'd never be able to come back. It was said that attaining the kind of power they held more than once was something the digital world just wouldn't allow. They'd never be able to reach that digivolution ever again, or so the legend goes. The thing is, legends aren't always true. A miracle was occurring in the digital world today, a miracle that could change the winds of the coming storm for the better. Or for the worse. Far off in a distant, nearly uninhabited part of the digital world there was an egg, and that egg was hatching. That pretty much sums it up, Genai, frowned Tai, nothing at all. It had been 2.5 weeks since they'd learned there was a generation of Digidestined predating their own, and since then they hadn't found out a thing about them despite their snooping. They hadn't even heard anything about any sort of digital disturbances before the ones that they'd played a part in. It's like these guys didn't exist. There's nothing even hinting at any digital occurrences in the real world when we tried looking it up on the net or in old newspapers, grumbled Davis. Some of the other Digidestined noted that he seemed to be in quite the bad mood. He'd been very irritable lately, and seemingly no one knew why. If anyone did have an idea as to what was going on with him, they certainly weren't saying anything about it. That's unfortunate, replied Genai, although, I may have a bit of a lead. The chosen children perked up at that. A lead, what is it? Inquired Izzy. You all know of digital signals, yes. I'm sure Izzy must have told you about them by now. Upon receiving nods he continued, well, I was doing a bit of searching myself from this side and I noticed something. I told you all of how Ceresman went to search for the original Digidestined in the human world. Well, I have been tracking her as best as I can. Considering my current circumstances, it took a bit of time for me to notice since I was on the move at the time, but a little over 2 weeks ago she stopped moving in Shibuya and shortly after that 6 digital signals appeared. There are 6 corresponding signals here in the digital world as well. Really? Shibuya? Asked Matt, thoughtfully. We just met 3 new destined from there, and they said they had 3 friends who were destined as well. But Takuya said they'd just left their Digimon at home, interjected Hikari. Besides, did you see their faces when we told them about our adventures in the digital world? They looked too surprised to be our predecessors. You'd think they would have been less impressed, for lack of a better word, if they'd really had adventures of their own. While still skeptical, Matt dropped his argument. For now, Hikari had more of a point. Anime and manga. Still, said Tai, we can at least go and talk to them. See if they've noticed anything. The others nodded at his decision and after a bit more talk between them and Genai, their digital friend had to take his leave. I have already been in this place for 5 days, far too long with the likes of Marsman chasing after me. I must move on. I will contact you all as soon as I can. Stay safe, children. With that, Genai vanished from the screen, leaving the chosen children to debate among themselves. So, started Ken, we have 6 signals in Shibuya and 6 signals in the digital world. I'm assuming the 6 signals there are their Digimon partners. It is the most logical conclusion. I mean, what else could it be? Inquired Cody. Digi-eggs. Guessed Davis. You know, maybe they could armor digivolve like us. Good guess Davis, but Digi-eggs for armor digivolution have a slightly different digital signal than that of a Digimon. They don't perfectly match the Destined's digital signal like their partner Digimon would. If there was a chance of the signal being a Digi-egg, Genai would have said something, replied Izzy. Davis shrugged, uncaringly as he proceeded to look off towards one of the 4 corners of Tai's living room. The leader of the first Digidestined found his behavior to be excessively odd. This was nothing like the Davis he knew. He was far too subdued and grumpy to be the usual fiery, happy, and still grumpy sometimes, and fun boy he'd come to accept as a friend. Tai was worried about the boy and unfortunately, he had no idea what was making him act this way. Pretty much, replied Sora, leaning into Matt with a sigh. The chosen children were far off the mark in their assumption of course, but it was expected. Genai, though giving a decent enough summary of Ceresman's tale, hadn't mentioned what the Digidestined she witnessed were truly capable of. Besides, as far as he knew, it wasn't impossible to combine with one's Digimon partner. Matt and Tai had done so with War Greymon and Metal Geruruman to form Omnimon, so it's understandable why he wouldn't question the legendary warriors being expelled from Suzanumon's body, especially since Suzanuman didn't vanish after they were disconnected from it. Child care. With all that in mind, the Digidestined would find something they didn't quite bargain for if they decided to search for the supposed partner Digimon of their predecessors. X. Well, it's getting late, said Mimi, you guys should probably get going. Most of the others agreed despite her odd wording. As far as Hikari, Sora, and Yole were concerned though, they could see where this could potentially be leading. Smiling, they helped usher everyone out of Ty's apartment. You're not leaving yet? Asked Ty, having been too preoccupied with the current information regarding their search and Davis's behavior to catch her earlier statement completely. Mimi, with a dazzling smile on her face, shook her head. I wanted to stay and chat for a bit. It's been a while since we've talked together, around a week. You don't mind, do you? She asked. Ty noticed she had an almost pleading, puppy dog-like look in her eyes. Needless to say, he caved into her request. Of course I don't mind, he replied, taking a seat on the couch. Mimi smiled and sat next to him. So, what do you want to talk about? X. Carrie yawned as she walked into her house. Looking at the clock, she saw that it was drawing close to midnight. She was positive her parents were already fast asleep and she figured she should try and do the same. Taking a quick shower, she prepared for bed, and right when her head touched the pillow, her phone vibrated. Grabbing it off her nightstand, she checked the message. Awake. Carrie raised a brow, wondering why Takuya was texting her so late at night. She was tired and tempted to just reply in the morning, but she ended up replying anyway. She wasn't sure why, but she didn't just want to leave him hanging. The two had gotten to know each other better since he wasn't worrying about an impending soccer game anymore. They still hadn't seen each other face to face since the night where she'd returned his Digivice, but they texted and called each other often enough, something that Yole was all too happy about. Carrie tried to convince her friend that they were just getting to know one another, but Yole only saw this as a prelude to a romantic relationship. Barely. I was just about to head to bed, I can spare a few minutes though. What's up? Pressing send, she waited for his reply. She didn't need to wait long before her phone vibrated again. Heading home. Kind of had a long day. Felt like talking to you, so I texted, sorry I stopped you from sleeping. Smiling, Carrie sent a reply. It's not a big deal, Takuya. I'm surprised you're getting home so late though. What kept you? Oh, just a meeting with my friends. It ran a bit late. It was Friday now and currently, Carrie was enduring the last few minutes of her history class. She didn't like history. She wasn't bad at it. In fact, she found it quite easy, but she found it to be rather boring, and the only true challenge she found in the class was staying awake, not the actual work. No one knew she felt like this about the course though. She was far too nice and respectful to blatantly show her dislike for the subject. That didn't stop her from eyeing the clock when no one was looking though. Carrie noticed she only had about 5 minutes left, so to keep herself busy, as she'd already finished her work, she glanced at Yole, whom she shared the class with along with Ken. Of her friends, these two were the only ones whom she'd been placed in class with at the start of the year. Yole, having seemingly just finished her work, looked over to Carrie around the same time. The two of them caught each other's eyes and Yole frowned almost instantly. Turning away from Carrie, Yole quickly scrawled something on a piece of paper and after checking that the teacher wasn't looking, threw it at Carrie's desk. Carrie picked up the note soon after it landed. After unfolding it, she read. The note from Yole had inquired as to why Davis was so angry lately. He was grumpy sometimes, sure, but not like this, and certainly not for such a long stretch of time. He just hadn't seemed right for the last week. Heaving a sigh, Carrie began her reply back. She wondered why Yole had immediately assumed she knew what was wrong. She did know, of course, but that was besides the point. She replied, telling her friend that she and Davis had recently gotten into a fight. Folding up the paper, she threw it back. As Yole grabbed the paper and began to read, the bell rang. Everyone began to filter out, and as the bespectacled girl went to ask her camera-loving friend about the fight directly, in a classroom a little down the hall, TK and Davis were packing up. Davis heaved a tired sigh, thinking back, for the 100th time, to the fight he'd had with Carrie. X=X=. Davis had just finished soccer practice and was making his way over to his friends at the bleachers. Ken, who had not been at practice today because he needed to work on an essay for English, was flirting with Yole. TK was reading a book from one of his classes. Cody said he needed to start training with his grandfather, so he'd already left, and Carrie was off to the side, away from the others. She was on the phone, chatting with a small smile on her face. Ever nosy, Davis wondered whom she was talking to and intended to find out. Davis looked up at the darkening sky with a smile on his face, as he and Carrie walked down the sidewalk. Today, Davis thought he was lucky. Usually, everyone would walk home in a big group or walk home alone, depending on what they had to do that day. It was rare that anything in between the two extremes occurred. Today happened to be one of those days though. Ken and Yole had a date, Cody had already gone home, and TK had been asked to help Matt out with something involving the older boys' band. Since it was just him and Carrie today, he surprisingly had the perfect chance to ask about the call. Not one to beat around the bush, he chose to be blunt. "Who were you on the phone with earlier?" he inquired somewhat indifferently, trying not to seem too eager to know her answer. Carrie glanced at him as she went through the day's photos on her digital camera. She loved a photo that needed to be developed more than a digital one, but she didn't particularly have a problem with digital either, and at least at school, it was more convenient. "Oh, just a friend," she replied, hoping he'd drop the subject lest this devolved into a problem. Davis frowned, knowing she was being vague on purpose. "Like, a guy friend?" Carrie groaned in her mind. "And if it is, Davis, who is it?" he responded, becoming somewhat more serious now that he knew she'd been talking to a guy, and smiling for him. Davis didn't like that. Carrie smiling for a guy he didn't know just didn't sit right with him, not with the kind of smile she'd had on her face. It was way too relaxed, too happy. It was like she'd seen the love of her life or something. Carrie didn't smile at him like that, she didn't smile at any of them like that. Worst of all, he doubted she even realized the difference, but everyone else did. "What does it matter?" She shot him a look, a frown starting to form on her face. "I don't need you to protect me, Davis, I can take care of myself. Besides, Takuya's not even like that," she replied, slightly irritated. She hadn't even noticed she'd let the legendary warrior of flames name slip. "So it's the Takuya guy, huh? The new Destined, what's so special about him?" inquired Davis, irritably. "He's just a nice guy, but that's not important. It's none of your business who I talk to." "What do you mean? I'm your friend Carrie." "Friendship. Yeah, Davis, you're my friend," she replied. For some reason, Davis could have sworn he heard her put extra emphasis on friend, but the boy wasn't sure. Friends don't get to decide whom their friends can and can't talk to. "You don't even know him." "I'd like to be more than a friend," Davis grimaced, his fists clenched. "If you'd let me," Carrie sighed, taking care that he didn't hear her. This is what she'd wanted to avoid. "Davis, we talked about this. You, TK, and I'm flattered that the two of you like me so much, really, I am, but you guys were just fighting over me so much and it was ruining your friendship, not to mention how badly it was straining things in our group. Up until it got really bad, I thought I could just not respond to either of you and that you two would eventually move on, but that didn't happen." Silence fell over them for a moment. Davis was gritting his teeth, not wanting to remember that day. Carrie had called him and TK out and she'd done the last thing he'd expected. She'd made it clear that she didn't like either of them and that they could never be more than friends. Davis, in his stubbornness, still asked her out every so often, even to this day, but he'd be lying if he said he was able to put his all into the endeavor, knowing that it would be fruitless in the end. "I'm sorry, Davis. I hurt you, but there just can't be an us and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop butting into my love life." Even if it's non-existent, Carrie added in her head. Davis didn't reply, and after a few awkward moments of silence, Carrie walked off. She wanted to go home and try to put this whole mess behind her. X equals. Davis sighed again, the memory of the fight still leaving some emotional pain in his heart whenever he thought about it. Davis, let's go, called Ken from the door. Davis hadn't realized he'd been spaced out for so long. Gathering up the rest of his stuff, he headed for the hallway. Yeah, I'm coming, he replied, not feeling at all up to soccer practice right now. X equals. Takuya sat in the park, his back against a tree and his hands behind his head. He and his friends were waiting for Ceresman. After their initial meeting, they'd quickly taken time to get used to having their spirits again. They felt whole now, complete, and even though they'd need to go to the digital world to retrieve their beast spirits, they were much happier now than before. The only thing that they wondered about now was Ceresman's situation. They'd been so concerned with getting used to their spirits again, as had she. The only reason they could see is the reason she never interrupted them to tell them of her plight, that they'd jumped right into training and hadn't gotten a chance to hear Ceresman's tale, until today. They hoped she would arrive soon, because now that they felt battle ready once more, they wanted to help her bring the digital world to peace just as they had done before. Just as Takuya was getting restless and about to annoy Koji for his entertainment, a voice called out to them. Hello, children. The warriors turned to see Ceresman walking up from behind them. They greeted her, and when she took a seat in the grass, a small smile gracing her lips, they decided to get right to the chase. We've had enough practice, said Takuya. We want to help you in the digital world as soon as we can. Will you tell us what's wrong? Ceresman merely nodded. Taking a deep breath, preparing herself to relive the memories once more, she told the warriors of her past. She spoke of Junoman's death, Plutoman's corruption, Titamon's power, the sealing of the Olympus 12, her memories of the warriors' journey in the digital world as the seal weakened, and then the breaking of the seals. From there she spoke of things she hadn't even told Genai. I was prepared to bring Plutoman down with me. It did not work out as I'd hoped though. X equals. Plutoman, roared Ceresman, her giant form flying towards him, the angered screech of the massive bird flooding the air with sound. Grinning, Plutoman met her charge. Earth and wing. Sharp rocks began to swirl around Ceresman's wings, the spinning chunks of earth promising pain to whomever dared challenge them. Plutoman put his arms forward. The pale gray light flashed to life as Ceresman's attack hit, protecting him. Gehenna Claw. Plutoman's tail shot forward, but despite her size, Ceresman was fast. Blurring out of view in a display of speed, she appeared behind Plutoman, her other wing nearing him with the same swirl of rocks. With no time to block, Plutoman was hit with the full force of the attack. Grunting in pain, he barreled into the ground below as Ceresman ascended into the air. Pulling himself out of the crater that had been created upon impact, Plutoman looked up to see Ceresman making a nosedive at him, her speed terrifying. Grimacing, a dark aura began to swirl around Plutoman, its power magnifying every second. Diving Quake. Plutoman knew this attack. It was one of Ceresman's most devastating. She would dive bomb her enemies with alarming speed and crash into them. Usually, such an impact with the ground would injure her greatly, but she was the earth. While her massive body crashed into the enemy, creating an earthquake the likes of which no other Digimon could even begin to try and replicate, her true body, Ceresman Medium, would pass harmlessly through the earth as if she was water. Plutoman continued to accumulate power, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash his attack, a moment in which Ceresman could not dodge. He looked at her waiting, and then his moment came. Within 20 feet of her, Plutoman unleashed his attack. Wrath of Hades. From his mouth, a massive beam of pitch-black light launched towards Ceresman at devastating speeds. There was no resistance from the earthen Mega as the beam took her form vanishing within its light. When the beam died down and Plutoman saw nothing remaining, he smirked, only for a heavy blow to crash into his jaw, sending him bouncing across the ground, skidding to a halt near Titamon. Though with some difficulty, Plutoman rose to his feet to see Ceresman Medium standing near where he'd once been, her fist, noticeably larger than usual, outstretched. She'd hit him with her Gaia fist attack. The Dark Mega growled, wondering when she'd left her body and could only assume she'd done it when she'd been close to the ground during her earthen wing attack. Thou art trying my patience, Ceresman. Good, she replied, ye had finished trying mine long ago, Plutoman. The earth cracked beneath her violently as everything around them shook. Plutoman's eyes widened. What she was doing was suicidal. With such a thick ceiling above her, a ceiling not made of earth at that, her attack could very well hurt. Ye plan to die trying to defeat us? In a heartbeat. If my death rids the digital world of the darkness that is the two of you, then my sacrifice is worth it. Earth Crush Coup. Holy Hammer. The attack was called, cutting of Ceresman as a gigantic bolt of lightning assaulted her from above. Her agonized scream filled the halls of Mount Olympus and spilled out into the night air. Plutoman smirked vilely as he glanced to his side. There, in all his golden glory, stood the leader of the Olympus 12, Jupiterman. Jupiterman's body was covered in radiant golden armor. His helmet was adorned with two small white wings just above the red line that was his eyes. Above his head were three crimson rings, shrinking from bottom to top. On his back was a cape made of pure white feathers, and on his armored feet were small wings. In his hands were two twin-headed hammers, lightning arcing around them. At Jupiterman's side was one of the other members Plutoman had successfully turned, Mervamon. Mervamon was a fiercely beautiful Digimon. Atop her head sat the skull of some sort of snake. Wrapped around the horn-like protrusions on the skull was a red cloth that mingled with the long, blue braids of her hair. Mervamon didn't have much in the way of armor. Black cloth, reminiscent of a bra, covered her bust. She wore black short shorts, and wrapped around her waist was more red cloth, acting as a skirt. Skin-tight black boots reached up her legs, stopping midway up her thighs. In her right hand was her great sword, the Olympia Kai, and her left arm was the body of a snake, her left hand being the snake's head. It was known as the Megalia. The bolt waned before vanishing, and in its place was Ceresman. Her body sported burns and her skin steamed. She fell to the ground soundlessly, almost as if she was dead, though, unfortunately in Plutoman's opinion, that was not the case, as she'd not turned into code. I see that thou hast taken to the gift I bestowed upon thee well, Jupiterman. The lightning Mega said nothing, a curt nod being his only response. What shall we do with Ceresman? Inquired Mervamon, looking to Plutoman and taking her eyes off Ceresman's unmoving form, a mistake on her part. Let her live. I have plans, foe. Just then, before any of them could react, Ceresman's body sunk into the earth, and moments after that her bird-like form appeared from the side of the mountain as if moving through a ripple. She was using the last of her energy to try and escape. She needed to find help. The time of peace that the digital world had known had once again come to an end. A storm was coming. A storm the likes of which had never been seen before. Plutoman knelt before a large, glowing pale gray stone. He didn't speak, didn't blink, and didn't move a muscle. Dianaman watched on, perplexed. She'd seen Plutoman do this often. After his moment of meditation, as he'd called it, he'd often have new plans of action, or information that he shouldn't have. Dianaman, for her part, was not loyal to Plutoman at all. Despite being hit by his absolute darkness, she hadn't fallen prey to its seemingly hypnotic effects like most of her comrades had. That said, she didn't believe Plutoman for a minute. She acted like it, of course. If she didn't, she'd seem different from her comrades who were most certainly brainwashed by him. Every time she saw him meditate, she wondered what he was really doing. Based on the way he held himself in the presence of that stone, it seemed to her that he had to be talking to something. Dianaman called Jupiterman as he walked away from Plutoman. The two had been discussing whatever the latter had discovered during his little session with the stone. You have a mission. Dianaman nodded. She hadn't sworn loyalty to the Olympus 12, she'd sworn loyalty to Jupiterman. She'd follow him wherever he led her, even if it was to her own death. For her, one's word was law. She would not betray him now, even if he was one of Plutoman's pawns. Her leader was completely under Plutoman's thumb. She knew that if he'd been completely aware of how he was following the Dark Mega's orders, that he'd likely delete himself out of disgrace. If she could, Dianaman would leave Plutoman's employ, but she couldn't abandon Jupiterman. It went against her code of honor, and she held that above her morals. Maybe if there was some way to snap Jupiterman out of this nonsense, she'd consider leaving. The method would have to have zero chances of failure though. Sighing, Dianaman resigned herself to her fate. Give me my orders, and they shall be carried out. It was Saturday now and the legendary warriors were supposed to be waiting for the chosen children at the mall down the street. That was the plan at least. Unfortunately, a massive wrench had been thrown into that. Instead of waiting in a mall, the 6 of them were now at their favorite park, listening to Ceresman. Late last night, Ceresman had contacted her warriors and told them of a problem. Takuya snorted at the mere thought of it. A problem? No. That didn't cut it. Ceresman was still in tune with happenings in the digital world and she'd felt something familiar making its way towards their beast spirits. She knew who it was, Dianaman. She explained that Dianaman hadn't seemed affected by Plutoman's powers the last time she'd seen her, but a bigger problem was that someone else she recognized was following her friend and this time they were definitely a threat. It's Marukiman. He's right on top of Dianaman's position, but I don't understand. She should know he's not on our side. Why is she not trying to fight him? They're the only members of the Olympus 12 there. Surely she could at least retaliate. Ceresman seemed quite distressed. So distressed, in fact, that she'd overlooked something very important. Anime and manga. Why is Dianaman heading towards our beast spirits in the first place? Inquired Koji, finding it suspicious. She shouldn't even know where they are. Silence was his reply. Are you sure that she's on our side? Asked Takuya, a frown now marring his face. Sure. Plutoman shouldn't know about the beast spirits either. Hell, he shouldn't even know that the legendary warriors were a threat, but he was the only one in the digital world who would have an interest in them. Furthermore, aside from Titamon, he was the only one in command of the Olympus 12 too. Yes, I am, replied Ceresman, hoping that she actually was. Dianaman was the most honorable of us all. She swore her loyalty to the Olympu. Oh, she cut herself off, fear washing over her. What? Asked Tommy, worriedly. Dianaman is the most honorable of us. She places her honor above her morals. It's been so long that I forgot. She may fight alongside the other Olympus 12, but she swore her loyalty to Jupiterman. Where he goes, she goes. No matter what. But wait, interjected Zoe, Jupiterman is under Plutoman's control, so that means she's working for Plutoman too, scowled JP. For a moment, silence washed over the 7 of them before Takuya made his decision. They couldn't allow Plutoman to get his hands on their beast spirits. If he did, they'd have no way to stand against him. They were far more skilled than they had been during their first adventure, but even they realized that skill alone wouldn't be enough. They'd need more power at their disposal than just their human spirits. Koji, Koichi, go with Ceresman to the digital world, ordered Takuya, entering his leader mode now that they knew what they were about to take on. War was coming. The rest of us will stay here and meet with Hikari and her friends. Don't let them get our spirits. You know where to find us when you get back. Koji merely nodded before raising his detector to the air, a static cloud of zeros and ones appearing soon after. Carrie frowned as the train from Odaiba to Shibuya sped across the tracks. Initially, she'd been excited about this little trip, but that had quickly changed when they'd gotten word from Genai that 2 extremely powerful Digimon seemed to be heading towards the digital signals they'd found. Seeing as how the digital signals in Shibuya hadn't made a move, they had reason to be worried. In order to make sure their enemies didn't get their hands on whatever the signals were, Tai, Matt, Davis, and Ken had crossed over to try and prevent anything serious from happening. Thinking about Takuya? Asked Yole, teasingly. Carrie glanced at her, putting her thoughts about their situation on hold. In response to Yole, her mind actually did end up wandering onto thoughts of the boy. They'd gotten to know each other so well recently, and she'd be lying if she said he wasn't a reason she was excited about this meeting. You know that's not what I was thinking about, replied Carrie. That much was true, but if she'd asked that question again. But you are now, smirked Yole. Carrie, cheeks flushed and she looked away. How've you two been anyway? Carrie frowned at the volume Yole was speaking. Glancing over at TK, she saw him looking out of the window, his earbuds securely in his ears. Breathing out a sigh of relief, she replied. We've been good. He's a really cool guy. I have fun talking to him. Cool enough to date? Inquired Yole, already giddy and hoping for a definite yes from her friend. Cool enough to definitely consider, thought Carrie, before she caught herself blushing again at her own thoughts, which did not go unnoticed by Yole. She glanced down at the floor. I don't know, Yole. Didn't I tell you I wasn't looking for a boyfriend right now? Well, this blush on your face tells me otherwise. Yole received a death glare, but it only made her smirk. Before Carrie could try and defend herself, Izzy spoke up. Guys, something's happening. Immediately, everyone gathered around him, including TK. Carrie noticed this, and her brows furrowed. Izzy hadn't been particularly loud when he'd gotten their attention, but TK heard it. Wouldn't that mean he could hear me and Yole? Carrie sighed inwardly. She predicted another talk similar to the one she had with Davis in the future, but she hoped it wouldn't come to pass. TK was the more mature of the two as well, so maybe she'd catch a break, maybe. Two of the digital signals in Shibuya just crossed over to the digital world. I think they're heading to where the corresponding signals are. The others were surprised by this. Shortly after Genai told them about the signals in Shibuya, Izzy asked if he could forward him the data. Genai complied, and since then Izzy had been keeping track of the signals. The thing is, the signals would just vanish most of the time. There were moments when they were very active, but that wouldn't last long, and after that he wouldn't be able to track them. We're just a stop away from Shibuya, said Joe. And that park, said Carrie, pointing to where the spirits were gathered on the map Izzy had their locations set on. It's really close to where we were supposed to meet Zoe and her friends. I've been there, we could swing by there first. If we're lucky, she trailed off, the implications of her words obvious to all of them. If they were lucky, they could meet their predecessors. Well then, said Sora, let's do it. Tai, Matt, Davis, and Ken were already waiting near the digital signals for Dianaman and Marukiman to show up. A few months ago, they'd discovered how to enter the digital world through any computer outside, yet still end up in a specific area of their choosing. They were thankful for that, because they didn't want to think about how far behind the two Olympian megas they could have been. Anime and manga told you they were digi-eggs, said Davis as the four of them looked at beast spirits before them. When they'd gotten here, they landed in front of a rather large temple of sorts. After having their Digimon digivolve into Omnimon and Imperial Dramon, the four of them went into the temple and left the two megas to guard the entrance. After looking around for a few minutes, Ken had stumbled upon the beast spirits. How do you even know this is what we're looking for? Asked Tai. Davis frowned at him. They're giving off so much energy that they're lighting up the room. What else could they be? Tai conceded there. Are you sure they're digi-eggs though? Asked Ken, still skeptical. They don't look like any digi-egg I've ever seen. Ancient digi-eggs, supplied Davis, still quite sure he wasn't wrong. Davis, your digi-eggs are ancient. If they're both ancient, then why should their designs be so different? Asked Matt as he picked up the beast spirit of darkness. This one gives me a bad feeling though. It's letting off a lot of dark energy. Maybe that one is being sealed away by the other five or something. Kind of like when Genai told us about what happened to Ceresman. Wondered Tai. He didn't think they were digi-eggs either, and Matt's claim had merit. Fine then, grumbled Davis, if they're not digi-eggs, then what are they? And if that one's evil, maybe you should put it down, and how are we supposed to move them anyway? What if taking them out of this temple messes with the seal thingy? If that's even what it is, maybe we should try to contact Is. Thousand Fist. Double Torrent. The two attacks cut Ken off, but what got the four boys moving was the explosion that broke through the doors from outside. Omnimon came flying past them, crashing into the wall. Omnimon! Shouted Tai. Whipping their heads around, they looked to the door and saw Dianamen and Marukiman. They're not the one we fought, growled Davis as Imperialdramon changed into his fighter mode. I take it ye are the human children who meddled in Marsman's affairs? Asked Marukiman. He said ye were interesting. Certainly, you will not supply us with a challenge, though. If I were Marsman, I may consider toying with thee, but I am not. Prepare to be deleted. Davis and Ken looked to Tai and Matt as Omnimon got back to his feet. There was nothing for them to do aside from fight. Nodding to one another, Ken turned back to the two Olympian megas. We're not underestimating you this time. Go for it, Imperialdramon. With pleasure. Splendor Blade. A sword of light shot forth from Imperialdramon's gauntlet as he brought it down on Marukiman. Not even batting an eye at the attack, Marukiman vanished in a blur of speed and the blade of light crashed into the earth, breaking it apart in a massive explosion that clouded the area. Taking this chance, Dianamen vanished into the dust and soon came flying out of it, rapidly approaching Omnimon. Garuru Cannon. Omnimon took quick aim and fired, but Dianamen knelt down, positioned her double-headed scythe at an angle and knocked the attack upwards before dashing forward and bringing her knee towards Omnimon's face. Acting quickly, Omnimon blocked her attack with his arms. Imperialdramon called Omnimon as he grabbed hold of one of Dianamen's arms, keeping her in place. On it. Splendor Blade. Dianamen kicked off of Omnimon with her other leg, giving her enough momentum to flip herself over him. Omnimon, dodge it, screamed Matt as Imperialdramon's attack neared. Omnimon let go of Dianamen as he sidestepped the blade, barely dodging it. Unfortunately, now that Dianamen was free, she immediately went back on the attack. Quickly, she brought her heel down on Imperialdramon's head, slamming the winged mega into the stone floor face first. Don't ye know how to do anything other than throw around your attacks? Where is the fight in thee? Questioned Dianamen as she glanced over at Omnimon. You, growled Tai. Omnimon, get her. Omnimon complied. Transcendent SW. Omnimon's attack was never finished as he felt a fist bury deep into his abdomen. Doubling over, Omnimon looked up to see Marukiman before him. Fast, thought Omnimon, when did he even get in front of me? Simply throwing around thine power will not help thee here. First, ye must ensure that thou hast the upper hand, said Marukiman as he pulled back his fist before throwing another swift punch into Omnimon's face. Omnimon stumbled backwards, dazed. Then ye can defeat thy enemy with brute force, though it is not necessary. Thousand Fist. Every single hit of his hyper barrage crashed home on Omnimon's body, throwing the mega through the temple walls, back into the forest outside. Omnimon, cried Matt. Imperialdramon, get up. You can do it, yelled Davis. Ken went over and grabbed the 6 beast spirits as Imperialdramon struggled to his feet, turning to Marukiman and Dianamen who had rejoined him. We need to take these with us, said Ken, but we can't stay in here. We need more room. Imperialdramon, take this fight outside. As their partners fled the temple through the hole Omnimon made, Imperialdramon aimed his laser. Positron laser, he cried, pouring his power into the attack. The beam roared out of his laser and the two Olympian megas separated to dodge the attack before retreating outside. Truthfully, they could have easily pressed their assault on the winged mega, but their mission was to retrieve the beast spirits, not fight a bunch of kids and their Digimon who didn't even know how to use their own power. Imperialdramon retreated through the hole his partners fled through, and when he reached them, he saw them surrounding the downed form of Omnimon. Did you get them? asked Davis, hoping that they were at least injured this time. I remember when we could only throw our power around. So many millennia have passed since then, don't ye agree, Dianamen? Asked Marukiman as he and his companion neared the Digidestined and their Digimon. Groaning, Omnimon struggled to his feet and he and Imperial Dramon stood in front of their partners. Anime and manga, I suppose, replied Dianamen as she twirled her scythe, moving in on her enemies. Growling, Imperial Dramon took to the air before dive-bombing her, a splendor blade already prepared. Dianamen swayed out of the attack's path before bringing up her right leg. Good night moon. Light shined out of the Good Night Sisters on Dianamen's legs, catching Imperial Dramon completely off guard. Before the winged Mega even knew what was happening, he crashed into the dirt, fast asleep. Omnimon tried to go and assist Imperial Dramon, but Marukiman blocked his way. Swiftly bringing up his sword, Omnimon slashed at Marukiman. Dodging, the wolf-like Mega grinned. Now you're getting it. It's a shame though, said Marukiman as a lightning-fast left jab slammed into Omnimon's face followed by an uppercut that brought the Night Mega off its feet. You still aren't good enough yet, and I suppose now, you never will be. With that, Marukiman grabbed Omnimon by the head, bringing it into his waiting knee before his knife, Aztec, appeared in his free hand. Goodbye. Raising his knife, he brought it down towards Omnimon's skull. Koji, Koichi, and Ceresman appeared further away from the temple that housed their beast spirits than they wanted. Quickly spirit evolving into Lobomon and Luiman, they hopped onto Ceresman's back once she took the form of an earthen bird. In the distance, they could see the temple. For a moment, they thought they'd beaten Dianamen and Marukiman there, right up until they saw Imperial Dramon's positron laser break through a wall near the temple's entrance. What was that? Asked Luiman. Lobomon narrowed his eyes, assuming it was the enemy. No idea. Probably hostile though. No, interjected Ceresman as she picked up speed, I know that attack. I saw it when the current generation of Digidestined, as Genai called them, tried to save me from Marsman. They must have known about your beast spirits somehow, we must save them. They cannot defeat my comrades as they are now. Can we? Inquired Lobomon. If they could handle the Olympus 12 alone, he would prefer that. There was no reason to get these other children injured if they didn't need to. No, I'm afraid not, replied Ceresman, your two groups will have to work together. Frowning, Lobomon simply nodded. Let's hurry and see if we can save them then, said Luiman. Well then you'll be pleased to know that we're here, said Ceresman. Lobomon and Luiman looked below them to see Omnimon making an unrefined slash at Marukiman. They saw that Imperial Dramon was already down and that there were 4 humans behind Omnimon. Wasting no time, the two of them jumped from Ceresman's back and dived towards the 2 fighting Digimon. Grabbing his swords, Lobomon brought them in front of him as he landed at Marukiman's side just before the Olympian Mega's knife could bury itself into Omnimon's head. Acting swiftly, Lobomon swung one of the blades upward, meeting the knife in a clash as Luiman landed next to Tai and the others. Wah! Davis could only get out that much as he looked up at Luiman in confusion. Ken was about to ask who Luiman was when the Warrior of Darkness spotted the beast spirits. Forcefully ripping his and Lobomon's spirits out of Ken's hands, he brought his into his detector. Lobomon, called Luiman as he threw the beast spirit of light towards his brother. Lobomon dodged a slash from Marukiman's knife and jumped back, grabbing his beast spirit and bringing it into his detector as his brother had done. With their beast spirits now at their disposal, the two brothers were surrounded by fractal code, signifying that they were changing back to human form, but before the code vanished, they called out at once. Fusion Spirit Evolution. The once dwindling fractal code exploded around them again, growing in power and chasing away the shadows of the forest. The fractal code continued to swirl around the two of them for only moments longer before dissipating and revealing the 2 Olympian Mega's new foes. Standing before Dianamen and Marukiman were Beowulfman and Rihiman, ready to take them on. Frowning, Marukiman looked ahead. He'd been so close to ending this farce, and now it seemed that the enemy had called in reinforcements. He wouldn't have minded so much if they were like those he'd just fought, but no. He had not been that lucky. From the brief exchange he'd had with the White One, Marukiman knew that they fought like true warriors. He was fairly certain he and Dianaman still held the upper hand in terms of pure power, but now that the enemy was actually able to properly do battle with them, that would only matter if he and Dianaman managed to actually get a clean blow, or if it came down to a clash of attacks. The two of ye seem as though ye will be far better opponents than your companions, said Marukiman, readying his knife as Dianaman quickly came to his side. She too had seen Beowulfman's display. She assumed the Black Digimon could also fight at their level. I see that we agree on something, then, replied Beowulfman as he readied his Beo saber. Tell me, why are you after the beast spirits? Marukiman merely grinned. I do not question orders from my master, so I do not know, and even if I did, I would not tell ye, replied Marukiman as he vanished. Had he been fighting anyone else, they may have lost track of him, but not Koji. He was the warrior of light. His speed was unparalleled. Raising his saber and pivoting to his left, he met Marukiman's knife. If the Olympian Mega was surprised by this, he did not show it. Ye are fast, but we have ye now, smirked Marukiman as he felt something nearing him. Glancing to his right, Koji saw Dianaman dashing towards him. Smirking himself, Beowulfman merely focused on Marukiman once more. Before Dianaman could land a blow, Rihiman appeared before her. His spear raised, he was nearly as fast as his brother. Knocking her scythe upward and opening her guard for an attack, Rihiman thrust his spear forward as Koji's leg flew into Marukiman's gut. Grunting, Marukiman disengaged as Dianaman strained herself to stay out of the way of Rihiman's spear. The two Olympian Megas backed away. They'd gone on the attack somewhat half-heartedly, wanting to test what their new opponents could do. They didn't disappoint. Collectible card games. Play time over, grunted Rihiman. Certainly, Dianaman replied, before the four Digimon went on the attack. Hikari and the other Destined exited the train in a hurry. Izzy monitored the status of the digital signals he'd locked onto as Hikari led everyone to the park. This is kind of exciting, said Mimi as they weaved through the crowds on the sidewalks. You're telling me, Joe replied. I haven't run this much in a while, frowned Izzy, and now I remember why I never liked it, he grumbled as they crossed the street to the park. Sora giggled at this. You'll be fine, Izzy, said Hikari, we're almost there. The rest of the run through the park was silent, and soon enough, the chosen children arrived at their destination, thinking they would be prepared for whatever they saw. The key word being, thinking. In front of them were Takuya, Zoe, and two more people they didn't recognize. Upon seeing them, Takuya had stopped in his tracks and muttered something that Hikari could only assume was, oh man. The chosen children, and Hikari especially, had already removed Takuya and his friends from their list when it came to the identities of the legendary warriors. There had been too much evidence against them for the chosen children to believe it was them at the time, but apparently they were wrong. Takuya? Asked Hikari, shocked. Takuya, for his part, was racking his brain for an excuse. He wondered if Hikari and her friends had been close enough to see Koji and Koichi enter the digital rift. As he frantically tried to come up with something, a thought occurred to him. Did they even need to keep their identities a secret? Based on the adventures Hikari and her friends had told him about and what Ceresman said she'd seen of the children he and the other warriors were supposed to work with, Hikari and her friends were definitely the people they'd be fighting alongside. The situation had changed too. They were no longer trying to get into the digital world to retrieve their spirits, and now that they actually had to work with the Digidestined, as they addressed themselves, Takuya didn't see any point in hiding things from them. If they were suspicious enough to ask about it, then he'd tell them, and he was betting they were suspicious. Why else would they be here instead of at the meeting place? How did they even know they were here anyway? Hey Hikari, you're one of the original Digidestined, aren't you? Asked Izzy, interrupting Hikari. Deciding to try to take this all in stride, Takuya replied. That's not what we're called, he said, but since that's what you're most familiar with, I'll let you call us that for now. Izzy was about to ask another question until Carrie spoke up. Why did you hide this from us? She asked, her brows furrowed. Takuya looked at her and his heart cringed upon seeing the hurt in her eyes. Carrie couldn't understand. She'd thought she and Takuya had been becoming such good friends, and now she was finding out he couldn't even trust her. Had she been too hasty with their growing friendship? How could she have a friend that didn't trust her? Psychology. I was right, she thought. Now definitely isn't the time to be thinking of boys. She'd been lying to herself that she wasn't interested in at least going on a date with him, to test the waters of course. It could have been something friendly so she could see if she really felt anything for him aside from physical attraction. Now though, she didn't think that would be happening anytime soon. Takuya stuttered over his words. After seeing the look on Carrie's face, it clicked that he'd possibly ruined the progress they'd been making as friends. Should I have been less cautious with the information? He asked himself. I didn't want to lose her friendship over this. Looks like I'll have to clear things up with her. The only real friend Takuya had made from the chosen children had been Carrie. Did he want to make friends with the rest? Yes, but she'd been his first, so her friendship was important to him. Aside from that, he had considered asking her out on a date, a friendly one, but a date nonetheless, though he would only label it as such in his mind. He had to fix this. At the time, said Zoe, saving her leader from something that was obviously bringing him some discomfort, we just wanted to get our spirits back. We had a lot of questions that needed answering, and honestly we didn't think you'd believe anything we told you about us until you saw it for yourselves. Not to mention that we're a very cautious group. We don't give up information as easily as you all do. Spirits. What are those? TK asked. Follow us, said JP before Takuya could start explaining. The group made their way back to the warrior's favorite little spot in the park, and as they got comfortable, Takuya spoke up. Well, we have a very different way of digivolution compared to your group. Admittedly, yours is the more practical of the two, but I like ours, so I'm not complaining, he replied, beating around the bush since he wanted to ease into this. So what is it? Asked Cody. Well, you guys told us about your partner Digimon, right? Asked Takuya. We don't have those. What? Asked Izzy, his brows furrowed in confusion as he took a seat in the grass, but that makes no sense. How would you even attempt to battle against other Digimon? How could you have possibly saved the digital world? We get our power, and our namesake, from the set of warriors that first brought the digital world together, Zoe replied. They were known as the 10 legendary warriors. They sacrificed themselves to unify the digital world, but they left behind their spirits to protect it. So you summon their spirits to do battle? Asked Sora, not quite understanding. She didn't see how something like that could work. Sort of, Tommy replied, trailing off as he tried to think of a way to explain. There's probably no way to actually explain this any differently, so I'll just come out and say it, Takuya said. Through the process known as spirit evolution, we become one with the warrior spirits and turn into Digimon ourselves. That's how we do battle. Takuya was met with silence. You're kidding, right? Asked Yole. She'd been the first one to recover from the shock that Takuya's declaration had put the chosen children in. She couldn't believe that he was telling the truth. That sounded impossible. Disregarding all the technical details that she will probably never understand, she couldn't believe Takuya and his friends could even still be alive. Friendship. She remembered that the other Digidestined and herself could sometimes get hurt while just being on the sidelines of a battle between Digimon. But to actually be the one doing the fighting, just the thought of it sent shivers down her spine. He couldn't be telling the truth. He just couldn't. Takuya shook his head. No. As I said, your way is more practical. You probably had a lot less brushes with death than we did, he replied, trailing off as he thought about the many times his fractal code had appeared around his body after a defeat. Luck had been the only thing to save him and the other warriors from being, and he knew it. Do you have any proof? TK asked skeptically. He wasn't about to take a story like that at face value. Not right now, no, JP replied. Maybe if it was nighttime we would show you, but we aren't taking the risk of being seen spirit evolving in broad daylight. I still don't understand, frowned Carrie. If you all are our predecessors, why did you seem so surprised when we were telling you about our adventures? Izzy nodded here, agreeing with Carrie's question. It didn't make much sense to him either. Though the tech genius had a few guesses, he just wanted to be sure. To be honest, your adventures didn't surprise us, Zoe replied. They sound like the norm, actually, added Takuya. Yeah, Zoe agreed. What really surprised us was how much the digital world changed. We know a lot of time passed there in comparison to our world, but some of the changes we noticed just got to us. What changes? Asked Mimi. Well, the biggest one was kind of why we didn't trust you right away. You see, you told us that you'd been called to the digital world by Genai, and on a higher level, Azulongmon. You told us he was the digital world's protector. When we were in the digital world it had 3 protectors. None of which went by Azulongmon, said Takuya. Yeah, added Tommy, back when we were there it was protected by Cherubimon, Seraphimon, and Ophanamon. Our guide had been Lady Ophanamon, and truthfully, we've never even heard of a Digimon by the name of Azulongmon. Furthermore, the only time you ever mentioned Seraphimon and Cherubimon was during a fight where Cherubimon had been corrupted and turned into Kerpimon according to what Koji said. That was fairly concerning to us, especially because that wasn't the first time he'd been turned dark side, JP added, frowning at the memories of their time doing battle against Kerpimon. Next, during our time in the digital world there were these Digimon known as Trailmen. They were basically trains that allowed for travel around the world. We thought it odd that you never mentioned them and all we can assume is that they don't exist anymore, Zoe said, a scowl slowly making its way onto her face. She already wasn't looking forward to the extra walking that would need to be done once they started making more frequent trips to the digital world. The chosen children were surprised to say the least. They couldn't imagine that someone aside from Azulongmon could be the protector of the digital world, and now they find out that it wasn't even a someone, but instead it was multiple Digimon. The very idea was odd to them. Okay, so assuming that you're telling the truth, started Joe, why couldn't you have told us this sooner? Like Zoe said, we don't give information as easily as you all do. We're very cautious, which is probably Koji's fault, so we just didn't tell you. We felt the need to wait, Takuya replied. Before any of the other Digidestined could speak up, Izzy spoke, intent on getting some of his other questions answered. Standardized and admissions tests. So, if you become your Digimon, what were those corresponding digital signals in the digital world I picked up? What signals are you talking about? Asked Tommy. Realizing that the warriors had no idea what he was talking about, Izzy told them what digital signals were and explained how it varied between Digi-Eggs and Digimon and how the ones that matched them were off. I think he's talking about our beast spirits, JP said. Beast spirits? Asked Cody. Yeah, the 10 legendary warriors had a set of spirits for each of them. A human spirit and a beast spirit, Zoe replied. Ceresman brought us our human spirits, but she hadn't felt safe retrieving our beast spirits. Koji and his brother Koichi went to retrieve them just before you guys came. Plutoman's forces were moving in on them, Takuya replied. Yes, we were alerted to something moving towards them too. Tai, Matt, Davis, and Ken went to try and protect them, said Sora, a frown making its way onto her face as she worried about Matt. The two groups continued to talk from there, discussing what differences there were between the versions of the digital world each group had protected. The conversation lasted for another hour before things finally screeched to a halt. It was still a bit awkward to talk for them, and the fact that the warriors still hadn't talked about their adventures at all was beginning to get to the Digidestined. So, started Yole. She would have went on to ask about their adventures if not for the digital rift that opened up behind the legendary warriors. Quickly, the two groups focused on the rift, though the Digidestined were tense. They'd never seen anything exactly like that before, and their first thoughts were that it could be hostile. Their worries were soon put to rest when Koji and Koichi walked out of the rift, followed by Tai, Matt, Ken, Davis, and Ceresman in human form. The 6 humans looked battered and bruised, but it was better than the condition Ken, Davis, and TK had returned in the last time. What happened? Asked Takuya. Did you get the beast spirits? Koji merely nodded in confirmation as he eyed the Digidestined. Turning back to his leader, he arched a brow, clearly not amused. Shrugging, Takuya told him he'd fill him in. Sighing, Koji held up his detector. Takuya knew he was agreeing to get the full story later in his own stubborn way as he and Koichi transferred the beast spirits back to their friends. We got there just in time to save their Digimon from being deleted, said Ceresman. These Olympian Digimon are strong, said Koichi, frowning. They fight like us. Takuya frowned. During their adventures there weren't many Digimon who fought like true warriors and not just powerhouses throwing around their weight, but the ones the legendary warriors had encountered were always their greatest enemies. Tell us everything, said Takuya, slipping into his leader mode. Koji was only too happy to comply. Marukiman and Dianaman returned to Mount Olympus, battered and bruised. Small cuts littered their bodies while various areas on their arms, legs, and abdomens were sickly shades of purple and blue. Despite this, they walked forward with their heads held high, entering into the meeting room where Plutoman and the other members of the Olympus 12 were waiting. Upon seeing them, their companions were startled. They had expected this little excursion to retrieve the items Plutoman wanted to be something simple, nothing but a trifle. They had all been very wrong. What happened? Questioned Plutoman demandingly. His eyes narrowed. Dianaman stared him down for a second, not intending to answer him. He was not her leader. When Marukiman spoke up though, she averted her gaze and faked shame and respect for the Dark Mega as best she could. Though she hated to act as if she was subservient to Plutoman, she needed him to think as much if she wished to avoid him trying to brainwash her as he'd done to her companions, or worse. We encountered the human children, Marukiman replied. And they bested you? Inquired Mervamon curtly. All of them had been informed of how unskilled the humans and their Digimon were by Marsman. If Marukiman and Dianaman were defeated, Marsman had either been tricked, which wasn't likely in their opinion, or Marukiman and Dianaman had grown weak. The latter of the two options were unacceptable. At Mervaman's inquiry though, Dianaman snorted. Hardly. We were about to delete them and retrieve our objective before 2 Digimon appeared, she replied. Yes. Following that, the 2 of them took 2 of the objects Plutoman wanted and used them to digivolve. Marukiman was the first to move, vanishing in a blur of speed in an attempt to force the fight in their favor. Beowulfman would not allow this though. Vanishing as well, he met Marukiman's knife before tilting his head in order to avoid the Olympian Mega's free fist. Bringing his knee up, Beowulfman aimed to bury it into Marukiman's gut, but his opponent disengaged, bringing Aztec down in hopes of stabbing Beowulfman's incoming appendage. Scowling, Beowulfman stopped suddenly and brought his leg down, aiming for Marukiman's ankle while using his free hand to knock Marukiman's knife-wielding hand upward. All of this happened within less than a second, a testament to their speed. Growling, Marukiman jumped back before Beowulfman could inflict an injury, and as he did this, his opponent aimed his free hand at the ground. Anime and manga. Cleansing light. The missiles and the laser were fired, crashing into the dirt below and kicking up a cloud of dust as the impact shook the surrounding area, knocking trees to the ground and making the small clearing they were in a bit larger. The Digidestined shielded their eyes as the dust washed over them, squinting as they tried to watch the fight from the area they'd retreated to, a close group of trees near the clearing. Not one to let good cover go to waste, Dianaman finally made her move. Leaping into the dust, she kept her senses sharp as she searched for her prey, hoping to catch Rihiman or Beowulfman off guard. It didn't take her long to find one of them. Or rather, for one of them to find her. Dianaman had been lucky. If she'd sensed him any later, there'd be a spear through her head instead of just to her right. Rihiman was upon her. Not wasting any time, she jumped to her left as his spear scythed towards her. Ducking as she moved, she waited for a follow-up as the weapon vanished into the thick cloud. When there was none, she only had to wonder why for a second. She jumped right into the path of Beowulfman's downward slash. Gritting her teeth, Dianaman skid to a stop as she raised her twin-headed scythe, deflecting the blow before she spun her weapon around and positioned it behind Beowulfman's head, determined to lop the body part right off. Dianaman pulled and Beowulfman vanished from her view. In the next moment she was flying back, leaving the cloud of smoke as Beowulfman lowered his fist within it. Bouncing once before she managed to get her feet under her, Dianaman grimaced, knowing she'd feel that one in the morning. She was about to enter into the dust again, but her senses went haywire, screaming at her to dodge. Sidestepping to her right, Rihiman's spear missed her by a narrow margin. Refusing to repeat their little clash in the dust, she immediately retaliated, spinning her scythe as he thrust his spear forward. The two weapons met and sparks flew as Beowulfman moved in on her from behind. This time though, his sneak attack would not be. Marukiman appeared in front of him, the Mega's fist already flying forward. Caught off guard, Beowulfman was nailed in the face, before receiving a swift follow-up blow to the abdomen, then an uppercut. Ing his fist once more, Marukiman growled out his attack. But he would not finish. Behind him, Rihiman had just successfully swept Dianaman off her feet and took this moment to let loose an attack of his own. Anime and manga. Darkness bluster. The cannons on Rihiman's shoulders charged dark energy quickly before letting it loose. He'd hoped he would be fast enough to catch both his enemies in the blast. The energy shot forward, cutting off Marukiman's attack and forcing him to turn around and block it. Unfortunately, this is all the time the warrior of light needed to get his bearing back, and so, from behind Marukiman, he mounted his own attack. Frozen Hunter. Sword raised and light energy coursing around it, Beowulfman slashed down, the giant wolf of light following in his wake. Tearing apart the ground as it neared Marukiman, there was a massive explosion of dirt and rock as the Olympian Mega was sandwiched between the two mighty assaults. More dust flew into the air as the earth moaned at the power of the two attacks, and then all was silent, but only for a moment. Though not as fast as those she was fighting, Dianaman was no slouch in terms of speed. Being swept off her feet was not enough for the acrobatic Olympian Mega to be caught off guard. The minute Rihiman had let his darkness bluster fly, she'd used her hands to push herself above it into the air, far above it, and she'd done it so quickly he'd lost sight of her while the light from his attack gave her cover. She'd been falling when Marukiman was caught between their two attacks and had to give her opponents silent respect. Their coordination is excellent and they are indeed skilled, thought Dianaman. Marukiman and I have the upper hand in terms of pure power, this I do not doubt, but their attacks are strong nonetheless. They are quite the worthy opponents. Nothing like the two we'd bested before them. Still, we shall crush them beneath us like all others before them. Artemis Arrow. Dianaman's attack caught the attention of the two legendary warriors, but they did not react as quickly as they might have hoped. The arrow tore through the air, rocketing down to the earth and crashed into Rihiman just as his attack ended. He'd been lucky enough to avoid a vital blow, but Rihiman was dropped to the ground regardless, the power behind Dianaman's attack being too much for him to brush off and remain standing. Beowulfman moved in like lightning the moment Rihiman fell, but Dianaman had been prepared. Before she touched down, she'd used her scarf in a way Beowulfman had not been expecting. Swiftly wrapping it around his arms, she dragged him beneath her with a mighty pull just in time to land on him, forcing the air out of his lungs and indenting the ground with his form. Wheezing, Beowulfman could not defend himself from the steel of her scythe bearing down on his head. Thankfully for him, Rihiman intervened. Though favoring his left arm, Rihiman threw his spear and it forced Dianaman to block, deflecting the weapon. Having been expecting something of this sort, Rihiman was already upon her, catching the spear midair and swatting her off Beowulfman. She flew back, crashing into one of the trees around the now almost cleared out field and shaking it to its roots. As she got back to her feet, Rihiman helped up Beowulfman before he went on the attack. He thrust his spear forward, meeting her scythe once more. This time though, the clash of weapons was brief as Dianaman flipped above him and over a tree branch, her scarf wrapping around his neck as she did so. Landing behind her enemy, she tugged and Rihiman was immediately hung, grasping at her scarf with his free hand in a desperate struggle for air. Not intending to let his brother suffer, Beowulfman dashed at her and he would have struck her had a swift knee to the stomach not stopped him. Eyes widening in pain and surprise, he registered the now visible form of a battered Marukiman, his right arm injured, though his left was ed back. Thousand Fist. And though the attack was slower without the use of Marukiman's other arm, every blow hit home. The sound of supersonic contact of flesh brought a smile to the Mega's lips. Yelling out in pain, Beowulfman was about to fly back, but before he could get far Marukiman grabbed hold of his leg and pulled him forward before letting go and delivering a vicious downward blow to his face. Beowulfman hit the dirt, cracked spider webbing across the ground beneath him upon impact. Hearing his brother scream sparked more will to fight in Rihiman than he'd had a moment ago, and despite his quickly dwindling oxygen supply he used Dianaman's scar to swing towards the tree, kick off of it and turn around before firing a darkness bluster. The attack slammed into Dianaman's back, setting Rihiman free. Anime and manga. While gasping for air, the warrior of darkness took off towards Marukiman, who turned around after seeing Dianaman fly past him thanks to a beam of concentrated darkness. Rot Cruise. Rihiman drew a red cross in the air before him with his spear. Spiritual Enchant. Marukiman drove Aztec into the ground at his feet. The cross shot forward as the earth rumbled and cracked before apparitions from a parallel universe leapt out of the ground and crashed into the cross. The two attacked battled for dominance before a screaming could be heard in the air. Looking up, Rihiman and Marukiman saw missiles falling towards their clashing attacks. Though greatly injured, the legendary warrior of light still had enough in him to use his cleansing light attack at speeds so blinding that Marukiman could not catch sight of it while distracted with his assault on Beowulfman. The attack fired directly into the air had eventually adhered to the laws of gravity, forcing the missiles to fall back down to the ground below, and now it had made contact with the two warring attacks. The three attacks exploded against each other, tossing the megas away. When the smoke cleared, Dianaman was struggling to her feet as Marukiman did the same. Rihiman was flat on his back, groaning across from them as Beowulfman was on his knees, trying to stand. The four combatants each got to their feet eventually, regrouping with their respective partners, prepared for round two. Unfortunately, it was obvious that the two warriors of darkness and light were losing ground. Marukiman's and Dianaman's attacks packed punches on par with the Royal Knights. Combine that with their skill level, and the fact that both the warriors were still a bit rusty after not being in actual battle for so long. The two of them could not win, not yet. Just as Marukiman and Dianaman were about to move in, a large shadow swooped over them and came to rest behind the legendary warriors. It was Ceresman. This battle ends now. The two of you will either retreat, or be deleted, stated the Earthen Mega. Marukiman grit his teeth as Dianaman merely looked on, inwardly relieved that Plutoman would not succeed in obtaining the prizes he sought. Had we not been injured, Ceresman, ye would not be leaving here alive. We shall see thee again, growled Marukiman before he vanished. Dianaman looked on for a moment longer before she left as well. After they left, Ceresman returned to her human form. We woke their partner Digimon, said Koji, motioning to Davis, Matt, Tai, and Ken, and then I opened a rift back here, he added. Takuya frowned with the end of Koji's retelling of the battle. It was obvious that the Olympian Digimon were formidable. That was even more apparent now that they had gone so long without any actual combat. Do you think we can match them if we get back to where we used to be? Takuya inquired, casting a glance to Koji and then Ceresman. I know that even though we've continued to train and grow in strength, our instincts in battle have dulled with how peaceful life has been since we saved the digital world. Takuya was certainly right. They sparred with one another regularly, but without the risk of death, there was just something different. There was just no way to compare a spar with a battle to the death. Too many things got in the way. You still would not have the power to match their attacks blow for blow, informed Ceresman. She's got a point, sighed Koichi. As far as skill is concerned, we are evenly matched. Unfortunately, they possess more power than we do. If Koji's cleansing light hadn't intervened at the end of the battle, I'm pretty sure Marukiman's attack would have overpowered my Rot Cruise. He trailed off here, frowning at what the outcome could have been. I'm not so sure, Koji replies, looking up thoughtfully. I can't really explain it all that well, but as we were fighting I felt something. It was like there was power bubbling within me, but something was covering it. I don't understand it though. Where would a power boost come from? The legendary warriors were silent for a moment before JP spoke up. Our training here. Zoe furrowed her brow and was about to speak before Izzy spoke up, tired of the legendary warriors ignoring him and the other Digidestined. How would that have any effect on your power in the digital world? What he said, Zoe agreed, not quite understanding JP's logic either. Well, I just remember that as we fought in the digital world, not only did our skill rise, so did our power. Although we had spirit evolution to rely on, I remember that there were times when enemies that were once challenging for us in our human spirit forms weren't too much of a problem later on. And I'm basing that in a bout of power. Not skill, he replied, crossing his arms with a serious expression on his face. He's got a point, said Tommy. The best example would probably be Koji and Takuya when they fought the Royal Knights. During their first few meetings, the Royal Knights not only had more skill, but they overpowered them too. As Koji and Takuya continued to fight them, though, that changed. The skill and power gaps were eventually bridged and those two knights were defeated. I think that as we become better fighters and improve our skills, our power responds in kind. It's a decent theory for us at the very least. It's worth looking into, said Takuya. We'll make some more trips to the digital world and take on any evil Digimon we come by to try and further our growth. Hopefully they're a challenger. This would be pointless, he decides, giving the members of his team their next step towards saving the digital world again. Anime and manga, can't you all just spar or something? Asked Carrie, timidly. Though she was still upset with Takuya, she didn't want him getting hurt. Fighting with other Digimon who have no qualms with hurting you seems awfully dangerous. That's exactly why we have to fight them, Zoe replied. Why? What's wrong with sparring against each other? You won't get hurt that way, frowned Sora. She was hoping that their new companions wouldn't put themselves in danger. In her experience, there was always the possibility of losing when it came to fighting Digimon. Being outnumbered or the enemy suddenly digivolving was always a risk. Exactly, said Takuya, that's the problem. Spars present no risk. They're challenging, yes, but we know nothing is on the line if we lose. There are critical differences between a sparring match and real battle. Friendship, affection, trust, things of that nature get in the way during a spar. When trying to attain more power, it's not a very good course of action because you know you have to hold something back. Going for the isn't an option, and that won't do, not for this, he replies, a coldness Carrie had never seen before leaking into his gaze and his voice. This wasn't the Takuya she knew, not at all. And that doesn't bother you? Questioned TK, a frown on his face as well. Not anymore, grunted Koji. For us, having the resolve to end a life is what decided our own survival. Or Bede, that's just how things work. But, we, said Tai, we're still so young. Teenagers, that's not a choice you should need to make. Tai clenched his fists, grimacing at the legendary warriors. They'd been making decisions of this magnitude since they were what? 12, 13 maybe. That just didn't sit right with him. It's almost like they're soldiers. Takuya's face scrunched in confusion. What the hell is Tai talking about? What do you mean? Inquired Takuya. You all made the exact same decisions. No, we didn't. Davis challenged. We always tried to resolve a conflict without deleting a Digimon. Takuya merely raised a brow at this as he crossed his arms, slightly annoyed. As did we. Though I admit we didn't always ask questions before putting a Digimon down, that's not the point though. You deleted Digimon, because you had to. If you didn't, you'd be dead, as would many people here in the human world. That's exactly the same as us, Zoe continued, or maybe you detached yourselves from that choice. Or was it because many of the Digimon you deleted were fakes? Then again, maybe it was just easier for you to ignore or cope with since you weren't actually the one deleting a Digimon. It was always your partner Digimon who did the fighting, theing. None of you ever had to dirty your own hands in that regard. We didn't have that luxury. We had to fight. There was no buffer between our decisions and their outcome for us. Our hands are stained with the blood of our enemies. It's something we've had to accept. Not that it was an easy process, but we've gotten past it now. Davis looked away now, no longer up to arguing about where the legendary warriors stood concerning the two sides that the Digidestined had conjured up to determine where others weighed in on their moral scales. It had always been fairly black or white with the Digidestined, but the warriors, they couldn't help but see them as a bit gray. And now that they'd had their own decisions argued, they couldn't help but wonder if they were gray too. Okay, said Ceresman, attempting to shift the atmosphere of the group to other things. How about we all go home today? We can meet in the digital world tomorrow and get to know one another better, come up with some plans for the coming battles, and get some training in. There's much I need to tell the Digidestined as well, but I can see we are all exhausted, physically and mentally. Get some rest, children. We can continue this discussion tomorrow. The legendary warriors nodded while the Destined mumbled their agreements, each of them lost in their thoughts for varying reasons. Where should we meet? Ken asked. Ceresman tapped her delicate finger against her lip for a moment before deciding that they should just meet at the same place the beast spirits had been placed. It was the only place both the warriors and the Destined had been to after all. Nodding at this, the warriors began to leave, each of them already thinking on what they needed to get done tomorrow, though Takuya did send a lingering glance to Carrie as she and her friends slowly made their way back to the train station. He resolved to get in touch with her soon. Tonight, he thought, and then he too shifted his thoughts to the coming training, and the more important battles that lay ahead in their future. They had taken the lives of Digimon. They may not have done so directly, but they'd given the order. Despite understanding this much though, they weren't sure what to feel about it now. Well, this certainly didn't go according to plan. Izzy spoke, breaking the silence that had fallen over the group. Yeah, who woulda thought that Takuya guy would be such a liar, huh? He totally could have told us the truth before now, grouched Davis, earning him an elbow to the gut courtesy of Yole as Mimi spoke up. It's not really that odd. If we hadn't seen his Digivice, we wouldn't have said anything at all. Besides, we still don't know what their adventures were like or how much it affected their personalities. One thing we do know is that whatever they went through made them overly cautious and forced them to get used to taking lives. Sora nods here, agreeing with her friend. I think they all deserve a second chance. We're going to need to work with them from now on anyway, and they saved Matt and the others. They can't be that bad, added the crest bearer of love. She wanted to trust their predecessors, and she wanted the others to trust them too. Carrie especially. Personally, she thought the way the warriors went about things could have been better, but that was already the past. Besides, she'd seen Takuya's face when Carrie questioned him. He'd looked genuinely regretful. That boy cared about Carrie in a way more than just acquaintances or simple friends. He had an interest in her. Sora knew Carrie at least had an interest in him as well. She didn't want to see the girl's first crush end before it could even begin, and as the bearer of the crest of love, well, she figured she could do a little something about that. Davis frowned at the joint response from Mimi and Sora, still feeling upset with the legendary warriors. He wasn't angry at them, if you don't count Takuya, per se, but he was still very flustered about how they'd made them question their views. So what? We're just supposed to let them hang with us like they didn't lie to our faces multiple times? Davis questioned with a huff. It was obvious the third generation leader of the Chosen was incensed. Of course, considering how hot-headed he was, that wasn't a particularly hard thing to do to him. Angering Davis was almost as easy as lighting a candle. That's not what she meant, Davis, TK spoke up, but we have to do battle alongside them from now on. I feel the same way you do, the bearer of hope trailed off here, locking eyes with Davis. A sort of understanding passed between them in that moment before TK continued. But since we have to work with them, we need to at least tolerate them. We'll certainly need to go further than that. These will be the people we will have to rely on now. They will be watching our backs as we will need to watch theirs, says Ken, attempting to truly elaborate on what Mimi and Sora were trying to get across to the more upset members of their group. It would not do for us to dwell too deeply on the fact that they lied. Presently, they hold no ill will towards us and will help us to the best of their abilities. They've proven as much already when they fought Marukiman and Dianaman. We are the only ones who have any misgivings about this partnership, and if we act in a caustic, or otherwise mean manner, it will strain our relationship with them and make our chances of success drop. If we want this to work, we need to hear them out and accept their apology if they give one. As Mimi said, we know nothing of what they've gone through. Before we grow angry with them, we should discover this and give them time to explain themselves. Visual art and design. The other members of the Chosen voiced their varying opinions on this. Some of them agreed with Ken, Mimi, and Sora, while others, like Cody and, surprisingly, Joe, leaned more towards TK and Davis's views due to their own personal feelings or ethics. Then there were those like Yole and Izzy who didn't really know how to feel about it at all. Throughout this, though, Carrie stayed silent while absently paying attention to the discussion. She didn't know how to feel herself. She was upset with Takuya for sure. She trusted him and she'd hoped he trusted her as well, yet the fact that he hadn't told her that he was one of the first destined or really anything about himself and his friends made her think that he didn't trust her at all. Carrie felt like she'd been letting her feelings get carried away when it came to the boy. She'd not intended to look for a relationship, yet she found herself staring at what could have been the starting line for one with Takuya. His lack of trust in her and his lies got rid of those thoughts though, but then she had to consider Sora and Mimi's words. Everyone deserved a second chance and she would be working closely with Takuya from now until the defeat of the Olympus 12, Plutoman, and Titamon at least. Could I trust him again? Carrie wondered. Heaving an inaudible sigh, Carrie was preparing herself to finally join the conversation before her cell let off a short tune, alerting her to a new text. Unlocking her phone, she read the message and stopped in her tracks before interrupting all of her companions. Takuya asked me to meet him at a cafe here in Shibuya. Right now. The rest of her companions stopped walking now too. Silence reigned for a beat. Well, that was a little sooner than I expected, said Mimi thoughtfully, breaking the quiet amongst them, one of her delicate fingers pressed to her slightly curved lips. Huh, scowled Davis, you expected this? Well, yes, Mimi replied. Takuya knew Carrie best among us and he's not a very hard person to read in situations like this. He certainly knows what he wants, she smiled. Carrie edged a brow as Davis's furrowed in confusion. She means he cares more about her opinion of him than our opinion of him, obviously. He didn't want her to leave Shibuya with a bad impression of him tonight, it seems. Sora to the rescue. But, why? Frowned Izzy. For all his knowledge, the boy was quite dense when it came to human relations. He was certainly getting better, but he still fell short in some areas. Ha, I knew it, squealed Yole as she walked over to Carrie so she could glomp the girl in a mighty hug. She'd already been suspecting what Sora meant for a while now. Huh, I am surprised I did not see it. was the only indicator that the owner of the crest of kindness understood what was going on. See what? Tai frowns, earning him a complete and utter lack of reply from his friends as Sora shook her head in his direction. Friendship. Poor Mimi, she thought, she's got a handful with that one. The remaining male members of the group kept their silence, whether they understood and didn't voice it or didn't understand and didn't voice that either was a mystery to the others. Well, questioned Yole with a grin as she released the girl from her grip, what are you going to do, Carrie? Carrie merely frowned. What was she going to do? I think you should go, Mimi intoned with a smile. Like Sora said, they all deserve a second chance. Besides, maybe with this, he'll actually tell you more about himself and their adventures. Carrie looked from the supportive visages of Mimi and Sora, to the excited Yole, to her still confused older brother before giving a small nod. I'll go, I'll be back before the last train. With that, she walked off leaving her friends behind as she headed for the meeting place Takuya had set up. As Tai watched his little sister's retreating form, his brows still furrowed, a single thought went through his mind. See what? Pitying his friend, Matt placed a hand on Tai's shoulder, prompting the boy to look his way. Pointing to himself, Matt whispered Takuya's name before pointing to Sora and whispering Carrie's. Tai's response was a once again furrowed brow before his eyes widened. You don't mean, Tai trailed off, not wanting to believe it. Matt merely nodded, looking to his sister, who'd gotten even further away. Tai's mouth hung slightly agape, right before he whispered something else out, his tone very obviously upset. Son of a bye, maybe I need to have a talk with everyone. We don't really need to be this cautious, do we? Sure, it's gotten us out of trouble, but now it's gotten us into trouble too, mused Takuya. So lost in thought, he didn't even notice that Carrie was now standing in front of him, staring at his thoughtful expression. She'd been in front of him for nearly a minute now, wondering if he'd notice her. Carrie had just concluded that he most likely would not unless she got his attention. Takuya, she called, startling the boy. His head flew up, his eyes catching hers, causing him to freeze up. She didn't look as upset as he'd been expecting, but she was definitely not happy either. Her expression betrayed nothing and Takuya was definitely feeling uncomfortable with the way she was looking at him. Hey, Hikari. Takuya, she repeated, this time in greeting, little inflection in her voice. With her tone not changing in any way, Takuya figured that no more words would be exchanged out here on the sidewalk. Taking a deep breath, he spoke once more. Shall we head inside? Carrie merely nodded, her silence unnerving him further. When they would talk on the phone, Carrie wasn't really a quiet girl. Not like this. Takuya wouldn't go so far as to call her chatty, but she wasn't one for this type of silence. He couldn't find the right words for it, he never was very eloquent, but he knew it wasn't like her and he didn't like it. People and society, and he knew this was his fault. Stepping towards the door, Takuya pulled at the handle and held it open for her, allowing Carrie to walk in first. Following her inside, he led her to the counter where they placed their orders. Both of them got hot chocolate, which Takuya had been expecting. They'd found out a while back that they had a love for it in common. After ordering and paying, Takuya led Carrie to a somewhat isolated booth in one of the corners of the establishment. The two of them sat down, and immediately entered into a staring contest. But not the playful kind. Takuya stared at Carrie, wondering where to begin, and she, in turn, stared at him. She wondered if she really wanted to be here right now. She could just leave when their drinks came and catch the next train to Odaiba, but Sora's words made her second guess that decision and Takuya had been the one to reach out to her. He'd even done so in a timely fashion. She supposed she could stay. Just listening to what he had to say didn't mean she had to forgive him or anything. She only needed to give him an opportunity to explain himself. So, started Takuya awkwardly, scratching at his cheek in unease. It was now or never, so he figured he needed to just get this over with. You lied to us, to me, she said, her hands clenching her skirt beneath the table. Yeah, Takuya sighed, lowering his head, I did. I'm sorry. Why did you do that? I trusted you, could you not trust me? And no, I could. I do. I trust you, Hikari, it's just. That's just our way. The things we went through in the digital world, it shaped us that way, it made us cautious with everything. We'd been tricked enough, you know. I'm not sure if all the Digimon you faced were as conniving as the ones we did, but they changed how we deal with people and were just, set in our ways, I guess. But you knew we were destined. You knew we just wanted what was best for the digital world. You knew. And yet you still never told us anything. You never told me anything. Yes, that's what it really came down to in the end, and Takuya could see it in her eyes. More than lying to the rest of the Digidestined, Carrie was more upset that he'd lied to her. She'd thought they could tell each other things, their relationship had been shaping up to end up that way, but him lying to her about something that important made her think otherwise. He couldn't blame her either. If the roles had been reversed, he doubted he wouldn't feel the same. I'm sorry, Hikari. Protecting our group is just second nature now. Masking the truth was like a reflex. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want you to feel like this. I'm sorry, I don't have any excuse. I did, it was wrong. You didn't deserve that. All I ask is that you give me a chance to make up for it, Takuya replied. This was it. The ball was in Carrie's court now. I hope everything is going well with Taku and Carrie, sighed Zoe, earning a snort from Koji as the two of them walked just behind their three other friends. They'd all decided to catch a late movie after their rocky meeting with the chosen children. Does it really matter? Those guys don't really need to like us to work with us. As long as they don't do anything to get in the way of saving the digital world, they can hate us for all I care. Why are you always so antisocial, Koji? Learn to make more friends. Your mother worries about you, Zoe chastised. Shooting her a glare from the corner of his eyes, Koji responded. Since when do you know how my mother feels about my social life? He sneered. Zoe ignored his expression, having long since gotten used to Koji and his moods, and smirked at him. Pregnant